right, are we live, folks? Are we live? Are we live? Are we live? Okay, looks like we're live. Okay, I sincerely hate OBS Studio. I love it, but I hate it. Okay, I literally thought I was streaming for the last 14 minutes, and this is not the first occurrence of this. I literally thought I was streaming. I was just yapping away, talking for the last 14 minutes, and the stream's not even on. So, my apologies. I'm very sorry to everyone those of you who are waiting on this stream to start at its scheduled time. But here we go. So, we're live now. All right. So, just to go through what I intended to tell you guys earlier. So today is obviously the 20-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, and this is a storm that just is not paralleled by anything else, right? You saw Hurricane Helene last year. Don't get me wrong, very devastating storm, especially for Appalachia. Caught a lot of people, I think, off guard, is the best way to put it. Just, never, I mean, who would think, you're hundreds of miles inland from the coastline that you'd ever take such a horrible hit from a hurricane. That's the thing that coastal communities have to deal with. Who would think way up in the mountains that you'd ever have to deal with something like that? But you do, and that's that's how things go sometimes. But you really, the thing about Katrina is you just never see the level of suffering, the level of just despair and just horrible events occurring, and such a large number of people impacted, such a large death toll. You just never really see that, especially in the United States of America. There are disasters all across the world from time to time that, that in countries that are less developed, okay, that yes, you will see death tolls in the thousands, right? But really, United States in the 21st century, you don't ever really see any other event like this. Just such a devastating storm, all just all the wrong things coming together to create this perfect storm, and just destroy so many coastal communities along the Gulf Coast. Not just New Orleans. We're not just talking about New Orleans here. We're also talking about South Mississippi, where you see storm surge values climb well over 20 feet. Okay, you're talking about upwards of 26 feet in some locations in South Mississippi, in that front right quadrant of the storm. Okay, you just don't see anything like that in the modern day. You just don't see that. And so I wanted to first, I wanted to go back through and just do a little time lapse of the storm. And by the way, this satellite loop was put together by the Hurricane Cycles YouTube channel. I wanted to give them credit. They're a small channel, but go subscribe to them. They only have about 30 subscribers, but they put out some good stuff. Okay, they put out some good satellite loops for some major hurricanes, so go support them. That being said, also support my channel. Don't leave me out of that. Make sure that you subscribe, and also ring the bell so you get notified whenever I do stream, or and that way of course, when we are successful on OBS Studio of actually getting the stream started, you will be notified, and you can make sure of that by ringing the bell next to the subscribe button and choosing all. Tell it you want all notifications, so that you never miss a stream or a video or anything like that. I also, just everybody, those of you who are watching, or just, even if you're watching the replay of this, put in the comments. I'm just curious, where were you at the time that Katrina hit? Like on August 29th, when you saw the news reports, what were you doing? Where were you? What town, city, state were you in at the time? How did it affect you? What did you think at the time? Comment down below. Tell me that. I'm curious. For me, I was 1.5 years old at the time, but many of you probably that watch this channel, many of you were probably a little bit older than that, could actually process things at the time. What did you think? What did you think seeing the images on TV of what was happening? I mean, just that level of devastation. The people on their rooftops, the people, that just whole towns just wiped clean off the map. That's just I'm just curious. So comment down below or put in the live chat if you're watching live. With that being said, also like the stream down below. Make sure that you show your support. Please do. Make sure that you like. Make sure that you subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. A lot of people think. I thought this too when I first, when I wasn't too familiar with YouTube. A lot of people think that they're not too familiar with the platform. You think of the term subscribe, you think, oh, I have to pay for something. No, you don't have to pay for anything. Subscribing is completely free. All you do is literally you have to hit a button and you have to be signed into your Gmail account. Okay, that's it. Now, if you are willing to put some money towards something, feel free to go shopping using the links down in the description of the stream. You can also, there's also the link to my my professional Facebook page, James's Weather Forecast. Make sure that you follow and like that page while you're down there. But also go shopping at those different links down there. You can get, now's a good time to stock up on emergency survival kits and things. Okay, go over to My Patriot Supply. We have the affiliate link down in the description. And right now they're running some good promotions, so go check them out. That way, if something like Katrina ever happens again, okay, you're prepared. You're not faced with starving to death or anything horrible like that. You can actually survive in the aftermath of a major disaster like Hurricane Katrina. Okay, and that's the thing going forward, is we really have to be the lessons that we take away from this, this storm, as well as these other ones that come and go and leave their trail of destruction, is just, how, that's what we have to think about, is how can we rebuild and build better, okay? Build better, build stronger, build more resilient for next time, for the next storm that comes through. How can we better prepare? That's a great first step right there. Get you an emergency food supply, emergency survival kit, a generator, anything like that. All those things will help you in a disaster like this. Shameless plug aside of the links, there's also other ones too. There's one for PetSmart. There's one for Walgreens. Anytime you're doing just your daily shopping, use those links. Help us out, please. But with all that being said, I want to go ahead and get into the weeds of this time lapse here with Hurricane Katrina. Okay, so we start off. This is August 22nd. You don't see anything other than you see this little cluster down here in the Eastern Caribbean. So we start off with that. It eventually starts to organize a little bit and moves over the Bahamas. Okay, so you essentially see the development of what at this time was referred to as Tropical Depression 12. All right, and then as it gets going, as it comes off of the Bahamas and heads towards South Florida, you actually see the storm strengthen into what is known as Tropical Storm Katrina at the time. Okay, and there are a lot of speculation. There's a lot of speculation about what the storm is going to do. You see some very, if you look back at the forecast cones at the time, you see a lot of pretty bad misses in terms of the 5-day trek. Okay, you see cones that are headed towards basically Panama City Beach, and not so much where the storm actually ended up, which was much further west. And there are a lot of factors that contribute to why those forecasts were in such error that far out. And that's a big improvement we have made since Katrina, as we have so much better nailed down the path of these storms. Most of the time, especially if the cone is relatively straight, most of the time where the center of the cone is, that's usually where the center of the eye ends up. Now, of course, you can have impacts. You don't want to just look at the cone. We always emphasize that. But generally speaking, in terms of nailing down the path of the storm, in terms of nailing down the path of the center of it, generally, the 3 or 4 or even 5 day forecast cone pretty much nails it right on the head. Okay, that's a major improvement that the National Hurricane Center has made over the past 20 years. In response to disasters like this. The thing that we haven't so much improved is the intensity forecast, but so there's definitely room to grow for sure. We are not out of the woods yet in terms of our forecasting challenges for hurricanes and tropical storms and tropical depressions. Okay, we definitely have a lot of room to grow, and we shouldn't let our guard down as meteorologists. There's always we can always perfect the forecast. You never want to get lost in, we've kind of exhausted most of the improvements that we're going to be able to make. There's not really too much more we can do to improve the forecast. There's always something we can do to improve the forecasts. The more data we have, the better the more that we know, that we get to know about in terms of how these storms develop and strengthen. Okay, the intensification patterns, all that stuff helps make a better forecast, and we can save more lives by doing it. Now, with that being said, so here we go going forward. Okay, we have Tropical Storm Katrina, and it's headed towards South Florida. All right, and so there's a lot of speculation. There's people that think that the storm's going to die. By people I mean meteorologists think that the storm's just going to die out. Some people think some meteorologists think it's going to track out in the Gulf. At this time, it was the Gulf of Mexico. We obviously know it operates under a different name now, but at the time, okay, this was 2005. This was called the Gulf of Mexico, and so we see the storm, cross over South Florida, and so it passes essentially over the Everglades. And as it does so, now to be fair, the Everglades are a heat source. They are a latent heat source that storms can sometimes strengthen over. Okay, and Katrina did just that. And if that doesn't tell you just how born to kill this storm was, that it literally strengthened from a tropical storm to a Category 1 hurricane over land, I don't know what does. And so it emerges off of South Florida. It's, and now you see it really start to get its act together. You see all those thunderstorms blowing up around the center, around the eye wall. Okay, really starts to get its act together. Now you have this massive storm out here in the Gulf. And this is where you start to see that picture perfect satellite image right here. Okay, where you have this clear eye. You could literally you could be, if you were on a boat in the middle of that eye, you would literally see blue sky right above you. Like, it's that crystal clear. Okay, it's something you didn't even have a few hours earlier. Okay, you have this mess as all the thunderstorms are blowing up around the center. Now you have this clearly defined eye and this massive storm barreling towards the coastline. And something you also see around the time of this satellite image, is you actually see the storm really, really strengthen last minute. Okay, in fact, I have it written down the notes at 15Z. Okay, 1500 Zulu time on August 28th, Sunday before the storm, literally the day before the storm comes ashore. For those of you who are not familiar with Zulu time, talking about 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time. So you think about, like, for most of the Gulf Coast, right, churches in session at this time, most people are at church. on Sunday morning around 10 a.m. So most people are in church at this time, worshiping. Okay, and we already know. Okay, the storm is barreling towards the coastline. It's a major threat. But at that advisory, and the reason I have access to this is because I did a research project last summer, and this was part of the research project was I had to document all of the different advisories and the changes with each advisory. At that advisory, we see a 6 hour pressure change of 28 millibars. Okay, talk about the bottom just falling out of the barometric pressure. 28 millibar dip in 6 hours. Sometimes you hear the term bomb cyclone. It's typically used to refer to extratropical cyclones, not tropical cyclones. Typically used to refer to aka winter storms. Okay, usually defined. I mean, it depends on the latitude, but typically somewhere around 24 millibars in 24 hours. So, like, if this type of a pressure drop occurred over the course of 24 hours in a winter storm of some sort, that would be considered a bomb cyclone by its very definition. This happened in 6 hours. 6 hours, the pressure dropped 28 millibars, and you also see the maximum sustained winds come up 30 miles per hour at the center. Literally, we go from a 145 mile per hour Cat 4, which is bad, okay? We go from that to a 175 mile per hour Cat 5 in 6 hours. And so you just see the storm just completely hit its maximum full-blown potential here out in the central Gulf, less than a day away from landfall. And so now you got people scrambling to evacuate as the outer bands start to come ashore on Sunday night, right? You've got people just scrambling to get out of Dodge, get out of there, and that obviously jams up the roads and makes it to where people can't get out, which is unfortunate. You even see occasionally with storms like Rita, okay, which was just about a month or so after this one, you see the traffic jams actually kill more people in some cases than the actual storm itself. So so you always, sometimes you never want the cure to be worse than the disease itself. But with that being said, so here you have this massive storm, and you see where, I know it's hard to see because the satellite image, the clouds cover up the landmass in this image, but you see how, so you basically at New Orleans is right here, right? And you also have South Mississippi, the coastline right here. So it's in that front right quadrant. So all that water is just getting pushed northward around that circulation. It's just getting pushed right into the Mississippi coastline. That's where you see those storm surge values of like 26 feet right there. Okay? So that gets pushed there. And you see the eye, it passes just to the east of New Orleans as it makes landfall. Okay, like New Orleans is right over here. It's in the backside of that storm. So the winds are coming out of the north, right across Lake Pontchartrain, coming basically pushing the water of Lake Pontchartrain right up against those levees on the northern side of New Orleans. Okay, and that's what causes, of course, the levees to fail. And you see the images speak for themselves as to what happened. And then, of course, the storm moves inland. I mean, look at this. The storm is literally almost over Memphis. And you still have just this massive storm. You have this massive cloud cluster covering the entire southeastern United States. You've got outer, like, it's still raining. You've still got outer bands coming through on much of the Gulf Coast still, okay? It's still raining down here on the Gulf Coast. You also have outer bands starting to come through in places like St. Louis, all right? St. Louis, Indianapolis. So, you start to see, that's just how massive this storm was. And eventually you do see it fizzles out, okay? It fizzles out and dissipates over the interior United States. But I mean, just just such a massive storm, and you can just tell how this storm was just born to kill. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. Just everything going just horribly wrong in the in the worst ways possible. Everything just occurring like who would think the storm would strengthen over land? Who would think the storm would still be this massive cluster, even well inland from the coastline? Like it was just this thing that just it just couldn't die. It couldn't die for for any reason until it finally did, of course, on August 30th. But that and then even then, it wasn't until it was like literally over the upper Midwest and Northeast. Like that's what it took. Had to travel all the way from the Gulf Coast all the way up into the Great Lakes region of the country for it to finally die out. Okay, so that's Hurricane Katrina in a nutshell. And a lot of these communities, most of them have rebuilt, but they're not the same. And it's one of those things that forever will hold a spot in most people's minds, right? Especially those who experienced it firsthand. Most people on the Gulf Coast that lived through it are never gonna forget it. Never gonna forget it and where they were that day when they saw the storm just blow up in intensity. So, with that being said, of course, our thoughts and prayers from on this channel still go out to all the victims of the storm. Even though it's been 20 years, but still, we pray for continued rebuilding and continued, for the families that lost loved ones in the storm. That never, this is kind of an unfortunate reminder of that day. That's the 20-year anniversary of it, and we pray for the victims of it, and we also we want to make sure that something like this, that next time we're better prepared, and that starts with making a big deal about it to the leadership of your communities. You have to have leaders in your communities that build to withstand something like this. I mean, to be fair, okay, nobody wants to have this conversation, but if the levees were actually built with stronger metal, okay, there's a good chance they may have held up a little better, and something like this wouldn't have happened. And New Orleans, just to tell the honest truth about it, New Orleans doesn't have the best track record of preparing for disasters. We saw very, very slow cleanup in the wake of the winter storm that came through and back in January. Just all these different events. Just New Orleans a lot of times lets itself get very caught off guard, excuse me, in the wake of in the wake of these natural disasters, and that's something that's got to be fixed. There's got to be a change in mindset. There's got to be a change in how things are done to better prepare for future natural disasters. But with that being said, I wanted to also do a quick forecast update before I sign off for the night. Doesn't look like we're getting a whole lot of viewership anyways, so that's fine. But with that being said, so here's kind of the situation we have now. I've got the WPC's surface analysis pulled up, and so you actually see quite a bit of rainy weather across the Gulf Coast today. That's large part due to this stationary front that's been parked over the Gulf Coast for quite some time now. All right, and that's going to continue. You're going to still see you're going to still see rainy weather continuing through the next few days, and as this front stalls, all right, until it eventually will get going, get out of here. But we're starting to get into that. Obviously it's not fall yet. It's still summer, but we're starting to. You can kind of tell that fall is on its way. and you're starting to see, obviously, you're starting to see the days get shorter. You're seeing less solar insolation received across the northern hemisphere. And so, you're starting to see, instead of these fronts stalling out over the mid south, and not even reaching the Gulf Coast. Okay, you're actually seeing fronts. They're not able to pass the Gulf Coast, but they are at least making it to the Gulf Coast, and that's a huge difference. So, and eventually, we're going to start to see cold fronts that are strong enough to actually pass through places like South Mississippi, Southern Alabama, the Florida Panhandle, and we're also going to start to see major systems start to trail their way through the northern tier of the country. Okay, and we're going to start to see that much more dynamic, much more, to use a technical term, much more baroclinic weather pattern start to kick in across the United States of America. So if we pull up any forecast model, we'll just start off with the GFS, right? So if we get this loaded in here, so you actually see, again, not too much going on, but now you actually, as we go into the first few days of September, okay, you actually see this low develop in southeastern Canada and start to track eastward. And you actually see some interesting colors here on the backside of it. Okay, so we could pull up a forecast sounding, and we see the temperature all the way down at 35 degrees. So we actually see some snowfall possible in early September across parts of. It's a little hard to tell on the map, but around in parts of northern Ontario. We're starting to see some wintry precip there in the forecast. So, we're starting to get into that time of year where these things are going to happen, where you're going to start to see major cold fronts sweep through. Not your summertime, just barely knock down the temperature any. We're actually going to see like 20 to 30 degree temperature knockdowns kick in, and obviously fronts with a lot of rainy weather and in some cases even snowy weather up in Canada. Okay, in some cases, we're going to start to see that track through the northern tier of the country, the plains, the Midwest, and we'll also start to see the temperatures cool off. We'll start to see the summer come to an end. Which, by the way, I am also working on a project for one of the companies that I work for. I'm working on a project where we're going to be monitoring the migration patterns of birds flying south this fall and the weather conditions that are associated with that. So if you live anywhere, especially in like the northern half of the United States, and if something like that sounds interesting to you, that you'd like to be a part of it, feel free to go ahead and comment down below, and I'll send you some more information about it. And I also am going to be offering an online course that just goes through sort of the fundamentals of meteorology and sort of takes a very much more technical look at things than what I even go through on my channel and all that stuff. So if you know anybody, especially any young weather enthusiasts, maybe you or somebody that has grown up maybe watching the Weather Channel, and of course, and I went through this too, where it's like there's just not a whole lot out there for in terms of classes offered in school, or even just things you can find online. Most of it's pretty much pretty, for lack of a better term, dumbed down. The stuff, the weather related lessons and things that you can find online. This is actually the real deal. This is targeted for high school students, and I'll probably wind up putting the description, or I'll probably wind up putting the link down in the description of the stream. And so go ahead and check that out too if you're interested. or just want to, or at least curious about it, I'll put the link down in the description of the stream, and you can sign up, or if you're a parent, you can sign up your son or daughter if you feel that something like that would be of interest to them. And it's really, it's a good way to help make the decision as to whether or not a career in the field is a good fit, either for you, or in some cases, if you're the parent, if sending your son or your daughter off to a 4-year college to study this is really a good idea. Okay, if that's really something that your child wants to do, or if it's just more of a hobby for them, it's a good way to get yourself a definitive answer on that before you go and spend tens of thousands of dollars on tuition, because tuition is ridiculous nowadays, to say the least. So if you can avoid that, if it's just going to go down the drain, why not find that out now before you do that? So anyways, I'm going to put the link down in the description once the stream is over with, and you can go visit the link and check that out. But with that being said, so here's going forward on this. So we actually so we start to see these low pressure systems start to sweep across. It starts out in southern Canada, and then you even start to see little action going on the lee side of the Rockies in the United States. Okay, you start to see these little shortwave troughs start to develop and track eastward. And with that being said, you're going to see some major temperature knockdowns with these. You're going to see the temperatures, the dew points come down significantly in these areas, and even cases where you're probably going to start needing to grab that jacket across a lot of the plains, a lot of the Midwest. Okay, in about a couple of weeks. And so, with that being said, so you see these different systems move through, and that's sort of the pattern that we're going to be getting ourselves into here very, very, very quickly. We may even start to see kind of like almost a little bit early of a start to fall across much of the plains in the Midwest compared to where we normally, usually you don't really see a major temperature knockdown until around the first day of fall, which is around, if I'm not mistaken, September 22nd is the first day of fall. You may see a little bit of an early start to fall for much of the plains and Midwest. So just be on the lookout for that. Especially just don't want to be caught off guard on the morning where it just happens to be a little bit chilly out. And make sure that you're watching the weather, and we'll be covering it on this channel too as that gets closer. So with that being said, though, that's pretty much your forecast. If you enjoyed all of this, please like down below, subscribe, and check out all of the links down in the description of the video. And if you are interested either in taking the course or one of the courses, because there's actually going to be multiple courses offered. There's going to be one on the fundamental principles of meteorology. There's also going to be one on meteorological instrumentation, where you actually get to learn how to operate your own weather balloon and take observations of the atmosphere. There's also going to be one that's going to be offered a little bit later on down the road, which actually gets into all of the mathematics behind meteorology, and that one really is a good one to determine, because a lot of students that go through the program, I watched this myself at my time at the University of South Alabama. A lot of students get a good ways through the program, and then they get to some of those applied mathematics courses where you're actually applying math and calculus and algebra to solve for meteorological variables, and that's the point where they decide to pull the plug. And it's very unfortunate, because at that point they're almost done and they've already wasted tens of thousands of dollars in tuition. So with that being said, it's a great way to just avoid that whole uncertainty. Really is what it is. You're avoiding uncertainty, and you're just for just a few $100 you can be much more confident in a decision that's ultimately worth tens of thousands of dollars. You're basically getting college quality material, but it's taught in such a way that students who maybe haven't quite gotten all the way through all the calculus, maybe even haven't even taken physics, but at least have somewhat of a background in algebra and whatnot, can take the dynamics course and get their feet wet at least with it, and just see if that's really something they would want to do. So if you're a parent, definitely it's a good thing to consider. Or if you're the student in that case and you're trying to decide on a major, that's also a good thing to consider throwing some money towards for your own well-being there. And of course, the other two courses you don't have to have any background in math. And people of all ages, even young children, are welcome to take the course. Both the instrumentation course and the fundamental principles course. And of course, anybody of all ages is welcome to is welcome. Anybody of all ages are welcome to volunteer and participate in the bird migration project, and just monitoring the patterns as we start to see some of those big temperature knockdowns this fall. So with that being said, all those links will be down in the description below, and everyone have a great night.